Thanks for being with us today on the Healthcare Leadership Excellence podcast. Today's guest, this is one, I know you listen on your bike, I know you listen on in your car. This is probably one you're going to have to sit down and take some notes on. The reason I say that is I'm a baseball nut and I love Yogi Berra's comment of it ain't bragging when you can do it. And our guest today he not only knows his material, he's also a boarded endocrinologist by specialty, has worked 4 decades in medicine. He's an author of one book, Losing Patience, Why I Left, and an upcoming book, which will be the focus of our talk today, is his book on the EQ prescription, Put Yourself First to Thrive in Healthcare. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Mickey Libowitz with us. Doctor, thanks for being with us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Carl. Thanks for the invitation. It's always a treat to talk with you. And it's a treat to talk about, my favorite topic. Actually, it's my second favorite topic. My first is my granddaughters. So I always have to give a shout out to Shayna, Becca, and Talia. But close second is the emotional intelligence zone and my book, The EQ Prescription.
Okay, so just a little tee up on this one. There's a lot out there, and I'll just be blunt. There's a lot out there on emotional intelligence. It's warm, fuzzy. We need to hold hands. We need to, they've taken emotional intelligence and truly destroyed it as an actual science. And my use of it in my coaching says that it is a science. And so let's just jump in right into it. Well, let's have a couple of intros here. Why did you choose to write this book? And then we'll go into some of my questions.
Okay. Well, the first thing I just want to comment on is I always think about emotional intelligence. People think it's a soft skill, but it's about as soft as a softball. And the thing is, if you ever got hit by a softball, you would know that it's not so soft. And there's nothing soft about emotional intelligence. People who are high in emotional intelligence don't run from challenges or difficult conversations. They're just better at it. And that's the key to EQ, is that you're better at having relationships because you know yourself better. So if you know yourself better, you can know others better. So I just wanted to clarify, it's not the touchy-feely emo type of stuff that some people might talk about. EQ is a real deal, and it can really elevate not only people's personal lives, but their relationships.
So I want to jump in here. You're listening, folks, to a New York-based 40-year. This is not someone who's drank the Kool-Aid, has become warm fuzzy. 40 years in the medical trenches on the East Coast. I mean, here in the Northwest, we kind of have a reputation of, letting some things slide. You've lived 40 years, doctor, in an environment of very hard-hitting, reality-based medicine, and yet, in our pre-call, you gave this great phrase: in order to give your best, you have to be your best. And how does this emotional intelligence tie to well-being?
Well, since you bring it up, you're absolutely right. I've been in practice for 40 years, and for a very long time, I would get through the challenges and pain points of medicine, which are very generously given to us as clinicians. And for a very long time, I was using basic wit and instinct to get through these difficult situations and difficult interactions. And so I kept thinking that there's got to be something more that I could hang my hat on, just instead of just wit and instinct to get through. And a while back now, I'd say about 2018 or so, a friend of mine introduced me to the topic of emotional intelligence. And that was exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for a structure and a strategy that I can use in real time, that I could fall back on when the heat was on, when the waters are rough, the skies are gray, and the stress was high. And frankly, in medicine, the waters are always rough, the skies are always gray, and the stress is always high. So I I said this EQ is the way to go. It gives me a structure, a foundation that I could rely on when it's tough out there. And so, it gives me something like self-awareness. What am I thinking and feeling at this particular moment based upon what's in front of me? And what is the other person thinking and feeling when they're in their situation? And how do I manage myself through that particular moment, not only so I can get through, but to also help the other person who I'm working with get through. And then in the end, self-direction. What do I really want? And what do I really want to avoid? And so when I had this paradigm, I was like, okay, where am I in this interaction? Where am I even before I have the interaction? So I thought it was a great thing to have. And then what I did is something that I think is a little bit novel. In fact, I think it's pretty transformative. And that is I've taken the concept of emotional intelligence, which is well described back in 1990 by John Mayer and Peter Salve, and then brought to light by Daniel Goleman in 1995 in his book Emotional Intelligence and Why It Matters More Than IQ. And that is I combined EQ and those paradigms with another paradigm called the resiliency zone. And the resiliency zone was made popular by a woman named Elaine Miller Karras and her group. And she actually called the zone the resiliency zone because she was working with first responders, firemen, policemen, EMT paramedics, and the trauma that they faced and how to manage those traumas. So what I did is I took the EQ paradigm with the zone paradigm and I put them together. And that's when I came up with what I think is relatively unique called the EQ zone. So I can tell you a little bit more about how I came to knowing more about the zone, but the two together is a great paradigm. I've talked so many times to so many different people, and it's such a simple concept to grasp that once I've explained it to somebody, they could right away, immediately start using it in their own personal and professional lives.
So I want to put that on a shelf for just a second because that you've hit on two of the hottest topics in my world right now. Resiliency, because people are concerned about their employees and how many lack resiliency, and emotional intelligence, of course, is all over the place. So those two, we'll dig into that. A lot of our audience, doctor, and we talked about this in our pre-call, you're from medicine, you know that there's some pretty acid bath cynics out there of it's you may think it's a softball, but it's still fluff. And what's the data? Tell me, is there data? And yet a couple of chapters in your book talk about, hold on, slow down. There is solid data that says that this resiliency zone isn't just someone's opinion, but it works. So dig into the data for us. Again, we want people to get this book because it's worth the read. If you could give us just a primer, as it were, so people get curious enough to look further.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk more about that because I work a lot with clinicians, nurses, students. As you are, I'm certified as a coach. And what I've come to learn, especially during my years as a quality director at a hospital in Syracuse, New York, was that there's three things that clinicians, nurses, even students really value. The first is that they really want to talk with somebody who's credible. And whether it be somebody within their field or somebody who has knowledge just like you, who's been around the block quite a lot. So they want to talk to somebody who's credible. The second thing that's really important to them is data. They like science. And I've done multiple emotional intelligence assessments on all these groups, and you can see their logic bar is very long. Frankly, their emotional bar is a little bit short. So they do want data because they're very technically cited. And then the third thing that they want is what's in it for me? What do I gain by doing this? And what would I really want? And what would I really want to avoid? So with that in mind, the data is pretty clear that clinicians, nurses who are highly emotionally intelligent tend to have greater job satisfaction, which is really kind of critical because so many people are dissatisfied with their jobs. The other things that EQ brings is it enhances patient satisfaction and outcome scores. And today, in today's healthcare environment, when it's quality over quantity and value over volume, it leads to more money and better reimbursements. It also helps with decision making so that people are less likely to make a poor decision, whether it be commission or omission, and less likely to have a malpractice case. It helps with organizations retaining and recruiting clinicians and nurses.
Is
Well,
why?
it develops people who are high EQ leaders, especially high EQ leaders, can and leaders set the tone. It develops a culture and a climate that is psychologically safe. And people tend to want to be in those types of environments even more than the amount of money that they would make. So if you ask people, would you rather have an environment where the culture's good and the climate's good and you would like to and you would prefer to work there rather than making a lot of money in a poor culture and a poor climate that is toxic. And I know that firsthand because I've worked with a lot of OBGYN residents and others, and when they're given the choice, they chose the culture and climate even over money. And maybe the most important thing I just want to leave you with this is, burnout is unfortunately persistently high in healthcare, whether it be clinicians, nurses, even in students, even in undergraduate students. And the old joke is half the docs are burnt out and the other half just lie about it. But what we've learned is that people who are high in the EQ world tend to be less likely to be burnt out. And in my journey, I've been able to do a longitudinal research study on, I'm the medical director of a PA program in Syracuse. And we've shown that the students who are high in EQ and as a benefit have high success. That is to say, they make better decisions, better relationship, greater well-being, and greater quality of life. Those students are much less likely to burn out than the students with the lower EQ. So the data is very clear. And what's in it for the clinicians and nurses? It's all that and more.
Excellent. So now I want to do a deep dive, taking as much time as we need to get into this EQ zone, mixing EQ, which you've written about well in your book, and this resiliency zone. So just dig in there. The goal here with this question, Doctor, is our listeners listening to you today, I want them to be able to say, "Oh, I understand it and I can use this with this problem nurse I have, this challenging doctor that I'm working with. I want some takeaways, not quick little techniques, but strategic thinking approaches of I can incorporate this doctor's ideas in my daily work." So take it away on the EQ zone.
Okay, fabulous. So first of all, let me start with the zone. And again, full credit to Elaine Miller Karras and her brilliance and her group's brilliance. They came up with this very simple visualization of two horizontal lines. And if you're between those two horizontal lines, then you are probably your best self. Now, you would have to define what your best self looks like. But for some people, the best self is when they are just totally focused, concentrating, time doesn't move. They're just in it. Athletes are in their zone when they're like scoring, basket after basket or hitting home run after home run or something along those lines. So it's a very simple visualization, two horizontal lines. You're your best self, and people see you as your best self. Now, naturally in life, as life goes, there are things in life that will narrow your zone as something as simple as you didn't get enough sleep, or you have more things to do than time allows, or you're hangry, you didn't have a chance to eat. And then there's things naturally in life that will widen your zone, that you did get enough sleep and you were fed, or somebody, God forbid, gave you a compliment, or you made a great diagnosis or do something great. And it's great to know narrows your zone and what widens your zone, because if you feel your zone is being narrowed, then you could then get to the things that widen your zone and offset that.
Mhm.
As life also has it, we all get triggered. I mean, frankly, I get triggered all day. Little things might trigger me, like the computer's slow, or I ran out of juice on my cell phone or something. And then there are bigger things that can really trigger me. But the point is, if you're triggered, and especially if your zone is narrow, you might get bumped out of your zone. And if you're bumped out high, you might be irritated or angry or have an outburst. And if you're bumped out low, you might get withdrawn or depressed or saddened. And So you can get bumped out. Now, the thing is, if you know your triggers, you can either avoid them or you could prepare for them. So, and so then the question is, how do you know if you're in your zone? How do you know if it's wide or narrow, if you're bumped out or not? And then how do you manage it? And that all combines the EQ. So EQ, by being self-aware, I would know that my zone is narrow or wide. By being emotionally intelligent, I could tell if the person I'm managing or working with has their zone wide or narrow, if they're bumped out. And it makes a big difference because if your zone is narrow, like as an example, I was talking to my nurse, one of my nurse practitioners. I oversee our diabetes program at my hospital, and she went into a patient's room who has diabetes, and he was a button pusher to begin with. So she went in and she started laying down the law to him, and he didn't receive that very well. And he, in the end, threw her out of the room. So I talked to her and I said, what were you thinking about before you went in the room? She goes, I was in a bad mood. Stuff was going on at home. I was expecting pushback from him. And so she went in the room and she was hot. Her zone was narrow. Maybe she was even bumped out before. And I will tell you, typically nothing good happens when your zone is narrow or you're bumped out of your zone to begin with when you're beginning a conversation. So in that situation, if she had to do it again, she would have taken a step back, hit the pause button, manage herself, get herself back in the zone, and then be able to go into the room in a situation where her zone was wider and she would have more wiggle room for herself. She would be calmer and go in and people think differently when their zone is wide as opposed to when it's narrow, they're bumped out. And there's physiology behind that. When people are stressed in a fight or flight mode, their catecholamines and their cortisol level, their hormones, which I know a little bit about as an endocrinologist, they're firing. And when they're firing, that fixed amount of blood in your body goes away from the parts of your body that does your best thinking, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that sits right above your eyes and does your executive functioning. And that blood flow goes to the parts of your body, your muscles, that allow you to fight or flight. So nobody does their best thinking when they're in a fight or flight mode because they don't have the blood flow to the part of the brain that allows that to happen. It's just normal physiology. So if she had to do it again, she would have gotten herself in a better spot, let the blood flow to her brain a little bit better, and then approach the situation better. So what would I suggest to people who are having challenging interactions with people? I would suggest before you do, make sure you're in your zone and prepare appropriately for what you'd expect. And maybe this is most importantly, is self-direction. What do you really want in that interaction? And what do you want to avoid? And what do you have to do to get what you want? And what do you have to do to avoid what you don't want to have happen? So
So let
yeah, that'd be a long-winded answer, but I gave you a lot.
it perfect because it tees me up. We hit this a bit in the pre-call. I want because there's some I'm fairly well respected in my realm as a coach. There are times, though, without the magic MD behind the name, that I think some of my clients might be thinking, yeah, Carl, but. So now that I have someone that I know is a similar thinker, although they may not be listening today, I want to set up a scenario. I'm changing the facts, certainly. A surgeon, she's in charge of a large program, and and bless her heart, she's well intended. She's got a heart of gold. She also believes that emotional intelligence is quite soft and we just need to show up and do our job. I mean, when I'm in the OR, I'm saving lives, I'm not patting people on the head. So don't expect me to be charm school while I am doing my high subspecialty work. What keyed that scenario was a comment you just made of when physician X, who is very hard charging, starts yelling at someone, literally there's a biologic response. I mean, I may work at it, but when the cortisol starts to pump because I feel like I'm being attacked, my creative brain suddenly goes out the back door. Can you talk to this? And there are people listening that could be thinking, yeah, that's probably me. Talk to us a bit as a coach, as endocrinologist, what would you say to somebody that just, let's just show up and do our jobs. If we yell, it's no big deal. How would you respond to that?
Well, this, that's unfortunately, it's a little bit of a common scenario. And the surgeon is right. I mean, they have enormous amounts of responsibility, and the stress level is enormously high, and there's no substitute for competency. You have to be competent. And as one of my colleagues said to me, she was a nationally, internationally renowned endocrine surgeon. She used to say that caring without competency is crap, and she's right. And she's right. Competency is fundamental. It's foundational. You have to have it. The problem is that competency, and these are studies that people could accept or reject, but I accept them because I think it's true that 20% of your care is based upon your fundamental competency. The rest, 80% is due to your ability to connect and interact with people. Dale Carnegie maybe said it best that people are creatures of emotion. We're not creatures of logic. And if you really want to connect and you really want to take your career and your reputation from good to great, great to greater, and greater to greatest, it's not just going to be based upon your ability to do a surgical procedure. Because in the end, and Susan Scott, who wrote Fierce Conversations, maybe said it best. And she said that, that really what matters is after you have an interaction with somebody, what's the emotional wake that you want to leave behind? What do you want people really thinking about you in the end? So this particular surgeon might say, "Hey, I'm happy that people think of me as a great surgeon." But when they think about her as an example, in totality, they might say she's a great surgeon, but it's her being her, which I always feel is, not a great compliment. They're giving her a pass. Now, the problem with that, when you give people who could uh, react, in ways that set people back on their heels and make them feel defensive, is it has an impact on the fourth thing I was talking about. After credibility, data, and what's in it for me is what's in it for us as an organization.
Mhm.
And if you have somebody within the organization, independent of how skilled they are, but is harmful to the culture and climate of the organization, then that could really bring the organization down. There's a book called Why Hospitals Should Fly. It's a great book.
Yes,
Okay, you're familiar with it.
yes.
Oh, it's a wonderful book. It's a book that I read when I started becoming the quality director at the hospital where I worked at. And it's a fictional book about a hospital in Colorado and the value of culture and climate, and how in this situation one bad apple can spoil the whole group and could really take down the organization. Just one more. I got to give a shout out to Britt Barrett and Paul Spiegelman. They wrote a book. Oh, you're familiar with it? Okay, great.
Yeah,
Patients
I know,
come
Britt.
second. Yeah, patients come second. And patients come second because the leaders of the organization need to develop a culture and climate for the people who work within the organization to function at their highest level. And in that book, Why Hospitals Should Fly, when they had a surgeon in that exact situation who was extremely skilled but was taking down the culture and climate, they actually had that surgeon leave. And it was painful because they were bringing a lot of revenue, and it did help with their outcomes, but it had a detriment to their organization. Now, I'd hate to see that skilled surgeon have to leave the hospital, but maybe they need to be informed about, what do you want? Apologies only go so far. I mean, people only accept it for a certain period of time, but after they've been laid into another, they're like, hey, I don't want to work with this person. I was working with a colorectal surgeon who was exactly like that. And I would ask him, what do you really want? And what do you want to avoid? And when I asked him that, he didn't want to make people feel bad. That's not was his motives. And he had to recognize how his actions, resulted in people feeling, hurt and disrespected. And you can apologize, but after all, words do hurt.
Absolutely. So tell us more about how the EQ zone interacts with resiliency, because there might be some naysayers, even after listening to you for a few minutes this morning, that say, yeah, but it's still fluffy. No one's arguing with resilience. There, that's why people are leaving. And also, do feel free to bring in the insights from your first book, Losing My Patience. What about resiliency and how can EQ help resiliency?
Well, okay. Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about my first book, which is Losing My Patience. And I wrote that book back in 2007 after I had been in practice for 17 years. And I kept trying to figure out what's the best way to practice medicine because the system of medicine was overpowering. And I'm a sports guy. And so I use sports metaphors. And that's why the book is Losing My Patience, Why I Quit the Medical Game. And in some respects, it is a game because there are certainly rules of the game. There's winners and losers, and there's frankly a lot at stake, and just like any game. So it was a game to me, and I thought the other team that ended up starting with all the letters P, the pharma, the plaintiffs, the politicians, the payers, were beating our team of the providers or practitioners and the patients. And because their team was just beating us. I looked at the future of medicine at the end of 17 years of practice, and I go, this is not sustainable. There's got to be another way forward. And so but I wrote the book because I was just so disappointed, and I had such high expectations. I was, and still am, so idealistic about medicine and life in general. And I was disappointed, and so I left. And I wrote the book because it was actually cheaper and easier to write the book than it was to get a psychologist because my insurance wouldn't even pay for the psychologist. So I just took that route, and I got a lot off my chest. But what I was looking for since I wrote that book, because that book didn't really have a lot of solutions, other than what I said, earlier, is that all the players begin with the letter P. So I said, put all the P's in a pod and let them come together and figure out what's best for most, understanding that not everybody gets what they want. And that was my solution. But, that was idealistic. That was, not going to happen. So I kept looking for a solution to how to help clinicians of all types, because we're all in the same boat, whether you're a physician or you're a podiatrist or optometrist or a psychologist. We're all in the same boat. And so I was looking for a solution, nurses, students. I was looking for a solution on how to maintain ourselves through all these pain points that made me want to leave my practice of medicine. Frankly, beaten down, broken up, and burnt out. I was burnt out. So that's why I came up with the emotional intelligence zone, because I do think it offers a strategy and a structure that people can use in real time when the heat is on. And as I said before, the heat is always on. So the resiliency comes from recognizing, hey, I am right now, my zone is narrow. Okay, just sometimes just naming it to tame it goes a long way. The other day I woke up and I walked into the kitchen. I said to my wife, I am so irritable this morning. I feel better just by saying it. I learned other strategies like box breathing. I learned grounding and resourcing. So I think these all help with resiliency. And actually, my favorite go-to, and I have to be honest about this, is explicatives. I just love a good F-bomb or a good MF bomb. It just am quiet, by myself. And there's actually studies that cursing gives people a power over the situation and gives them control and makes people feel better. So all those strategies, being self-aware and using those strategies to help keep your zone wide or get back in your zone if you're bumped out, help with resiliency.
What's the box breathing?
The box breathing is you breathe in for 5 seconds, you hold it for 5 seconds, and you breathe out for 5 seconds. So it's either that, or I like a good sigh also.
Yeah.
It just goes a long way. And there's great physiology behind all these strategies.
So I had one surgeon tell me Carl, if I hear one more person say that I need to take a yoga class to be more resilient, I'm going to strangle him. I think a lot of the clients I've worked with have expressed similar. They're they're tired of the, well, you just go and do this. And I hear you saying that, some of those things, the deep breathing, the sighing, other interventions are good when someone's in a system that is just a buzz productivity, and they feel like they're on the hamster wheel. What are some good medically based taking care of yourself? Like you said, can't give your best if you're not your best. Any strategic approaches to maintaining the stress levels that isn't just well, take a yoga class?
Well, let me first say that there's been a lot written about yoga and meditation and mindfulness and the value of it. And there is, I've read through much of it, or I've read through some of it, and I can't say all of it because it's a big area. But as I understand it, the data is pretty good. In fact, it's very good that those strategies are very valuable and helpful to some. The challenge, and even personally for me, is that it does take some practice, to meditate. And a couple of my very good friends are do meditation, and it's very successful for them. And they teach it and they practice it. So it does take some time. So what I was looking for was something that people could do in real time when the poop, if you will, is hitting the fan. What do I manage? How do I manage myself that? How do I manage myself through that? And certainly it's never wrong to do the basic stuff right. It sounds colloquial, but eat right, sleep right, exercise, and that's take vacations. That's all great. But the poop is still going to hit the fan during those days. And you just, so how do you manage yourself when it's really the heat is on? And that's what I'm coming up with, these strategies. So the people who are in the trenches, seeing the patients day after day, hour after hour, and which I did, for many, many years and still do. I'm still clinical and I still see all the endocrine consults at our hospital and oversee our diabetes program. But what do you do in those exact situations? And that's what I was trying to come up with. And the book is written, for everybody in healthcare, but not just specifically for leaders. There are books on emotional intelligence and leadership, and people who are leaders who are emotionally intelligent tend to be better leaders for many of the reasons that I mentioned before. But the book is also for the people who are in the trenches doing the daily work.
Mhm.
So I wanted to give them something. I wanted to offer them something that they could use in real time, even after they've done their yoga or meditation, and that stuff is still happening.
So to wrap up here, Doctor, before we close up, any things that you want to mention or bring up that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, there's a couple of things. There's a catch to all this. There's a catch to it. And here's the catch. The catch comes down to an old riddle, and that is how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So if you really want to change, then this, and you want to improve. I mean, you might be good now, but can you be better?
Hmm.
Can you take it to the next level? And that's what I like to offer people is the opportunity to take this, however they're managing themselves, to take it to a next level and have something that they could fall back on. So I hope that they're the light bulb that they're going to want to change. You and I spoke that Einstein said one of the measures of real brilliance is the ability to change. And I can't think of more people that are more brilliant than the people I've met during my journey in healthcare. They are some incredibly smart people, incredibly talented, incredibly kind and compassionate. These are amazing people. And actually, it really kind of hurts me because to see some of my colleagues, some of the best people I've ever met in my entire life, be beaten down, broken up, and burnt out from the system. So again, that's why I wanted to offer this to people as a way to circumvent that and to survive through it.
Excellent. So you're listening to this on the 6th of October. The release date of Dr. Libowitz's book is tomorrow. What platforms can they get it on? I love Amazon. I boost their stock on a regular basis. Where else can they find your book?
Well, it'll be on certainly Amazon is a big one, but you could also order it through any of the bookstores that you frequent. Barnes and Noble, as you know, one of the major players. So that would be those two would be the best ways to get the book. And I hope it resonates with people. Again, it's a pure labor of love to written this book. I just see my colleagues have spent so much time, so much energy, so much sacrifice, so much, spent so much money, getting skilled and going through educated. It took me 15 years to get through, all the undergraduate and medical school training and all the internship and residency and chief residency and fellowship. It's such a shame that we can't really enjoy this as much as we've worked so hard to get to that level. And to me, it's always a shame that that we don't, and then people are leaving their practices prematurely at a time when, and you and I know this because we're getting older, and when the population is graying, and we need more people, and we can't go through this. We can't help people unless we have the right number of people to support. Medically, nursing wise, especially nurses. Gosh, our hospital cannot run without nurses. Offices cannot run without nurses. We need them. And I will say that behind every really good doctor is a great nurse. And I have so many great nurses that I'd like to shout out to that really helped me get from where I was to where I am.
Yep, excellent. So again, to our listeners, the book is, reading the title here, The EQ Prescription, Put Yourself First to Thrive in Healthcare. I love that, thriving. So put yourself first to thrive in healthcare. And to the author, Dr. Mickey Libowitz, thank you for spending your time with us this morning.
My pleasure, Carl. Thank you so much for inviting us. And I'll leave with this last word. As you brought out, in order to be your best, in order to give your best, you have to be your best. In order to be your best, you have to be well physically and emotionally. And the best way to do that is to take care of yourself first, put yourself first. And the best way to do that, the emotional intelligence zone.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And to
Thanks,
our
Carl. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
absolutely, and to our listeners, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Carl.